Hello everybody and welcome to another edition of the Anthony Peake Consciousness Hour. Today I'm really delighted to have as a guest somebody that I've admired for a long time. He's somebody that I've now met on 2 or 3 occasions, and we share so many areas of commonality in the terms of the way we wish to approach the mysteries of extraordinary human experiences. Because in many ways, a lot of extraordinary human experiences are taken too much out of context, and people tend to interpret them in ways that aren't necessarily scientific. In that my philosophy is very much that let's look at the science, because it's only by peculiar events that we'll be able to look at science in an objective way. In other words, it's through the black crows that really correct and proper science should develop. My guest today is a fellow Englishman by the name of Graham Nicholls. He's an artist, an expert on out-of-the-body experiences, and his exploration of these areas began when he was 12 years old, when he had a series of floating experiences a few feet above the ground. About a year later, he heard the term out-of-the-body experience for the first time. This led him to buy a scientific book on the subject, and 6 months later, intentionally leave his body for the first time. Shortly after this, as part of his growing interest in spirituality, he became a vegetarian, having already committed himself to abstain from tobacco, alcohol and recreational drugs at the age of just 10 years old, which I do find quite amazing at 10. A few years later, he travelled to India for the first time and explored the practice of yoga and came into contact with Jainism, which is its focus of non-violence, left a lasting impression on him. Out of a desire to express his ideas, Graham decided that art may be an avenue that would accommodate him. He decided to apply at art school, and despite having no formal qualifications, was accepted at Central St Martin's College in London, becoming the first of his family to go to university. While still studying, he gave his first public lecture on metaphysical topic at Oxford Town Hall, aged just 22. The following year, he was given his first solo art exhibition, which took place in Soho in New York City. Graham's artistic projects are actually multi-sensory environments that use audio recordings to take the participants on an inner meditative journey, immersing them in a powerful and unique experience. Many participants have described being deeply moved by these hypnotic experiences. In May 2004, he created a new kind of immersive environment using virtual reality computer technology called the Living Image, which was displayed at London's Science Museum. This project was designed to take the viewer into a psychological state akin to meditation or trance. The Living Image, as well as much of his work, has received praise in the press, including the BBC, the Daily Telegraph, as well as other magazines and websites. Due to his growing awareness of science and technology, he also began working with areas that examine psychical experience in an objective and rational way. This led him to become a member of the Society for Psychical Research and to correspond with Dean Radin, Tom Campbell, Dr. Peter Fenwick, Dr. Jeffrey Long and many others. He's also organised and conducted a series of telepathy experiments with the author and biologist Rupert Sheldrake. In 2010, Graham Nicholls completed work on his first book, Avenues of the Human Spirit, a compelling true account of his hundreds of out-of-the-body experiences and spiritual insights. Within a month of signing a publishing deal on his first book, he was commissioned by Llewellyn to write his second book, Navigating the Out-of-Body Experience, Radical New Techniques, which was published in 2012. Graham, I'm very, very delighted to have you join us today. So how's the weather over there in Latvia?
Tallinn, Estonia.
Oh, it's Estonia. Do you know, when we met, we were discussing the confusions on the Baltic states, and I always pride myself on being quite good with Baltic states. Clearly, this wet Sunday afternoon, my Baltic states are getting rather denuded and confused. Sorry about that. So what is it like?
Okay, well, it's sunny here anyway. It's been a very nice day.
Oh, it's better than here. It's great. We've had some fantastic weather. Graham and I met up in London about 6 or 7 weeks ago, and I was fortunate enough to catch Graham's lecture at the Society for Psychical Research, which we'll touch upon. And we also had the opportunity to go along to a lecture by Eric Davis on the writings and work of Philip K. Dick. So we had quite a fascinating couple of days of discussing various issues. But what I'd like to do, Graham, is that just reading out your background and your experiences, clearly you're quite an intriguing character in terms of the way you have lived your life. Could you put a little bit more meat on the bone in terms of your childhood experiences and how the out-of-body experience started for you, what you made of it and how you then developed it?
Well, I guess there was a sense that I did have some awareness of non-local perceptions, or whatever you want to call it, from a very young age. The very first things were an apparition when I was around, I guess, between 5 and 7, around that age. I walked into the hallway of my apartment that I grew up in, looked to the doorway, and basically saw a large figure standing in the doorway, which didn't just disappear. I looked away, tried to call out to my parents, but was really scared by the whole thing and didn't really know how to react. Then looked back, and it was still there, and lasted for a few minutes, I guess. I don't really recall, too long ago now, but I went down onto floor level. I remember that quite vividly because it gave me some sense of solidity. It was like I was trying to work out whether this was a dream or real, and it seemed like it was a real experience.
What was it like? What was it, male, female? Could you tell, or did you subsequently find out what it was?
It was very hard to say now. I mean, I did actually make some drawings very close to the time, but my artistic ability wasn't that great at that age. But it was humanoid, but I couldn't say that it was male or female. I guess the nearest thing I could compare it to now is it had characteristics I might associate with a shaman or something like that. It was wearing, what seemed like more like robes, or kind of tribal costume rather than anything I was familiar with. So yeah, quite an unusual experience, I guess. And after that, it basically just I also had some interesting perceptions that seemed almost like previous life type experiences, I would guess. Images and planetary stuff as well, stuff to do with other planets and things like that, which led to an interest in astronomy and things like that. So yeah, I had some very intriguing things when I was very young, but it's very hard to know and to put them into rational context so long after the event.
Are these has your family got any history of these type of experiences? Are you the first one?
No, there isn't any in my family. My family are very down to earth, sort of Cockney Londoners, I guess you would say. They're not really. I mean, they have a vague interest in those kinds of things, like anyone. They'll read an article if it's in the newspaper, or watch something if it's on the TV, but they never talked about anything like that when I was growing up. And there was no religion either. They, like most average British people, they were kind of lapsed Church of England, but never went to church and wasn't really interested in that kind of thing. So I don't really know where it came from in that sense. My grandmother maybe had a slight interest in being aware of certain things on that level, and she used to talk about, for example, smelling roses if someone had just died or things like that. She would talk about, but that was the only vague sense of anything like that in any of my family that I can think of.
Okay, so how did it then develop? So you had this mystical experience, these sensations of otherworldliness, but how did that start to then manifest as you got older?
Well, I guess it just gave me this openness. I had a sort of open-mindedness towards those kinds of things, but I didn't particularly pursue it. I guess it was at 12 when I started to have these initial out-of-body experiences that just happened spontaneously, and they didn't last very long, and I would just lay down and relax, and then suddenly I would find myself, there was no sense of leaving the body or anything like that. I would just find myself usually out of the house somewhere nearby, and around a foot, 2 feet off the ground, that kind of height, but in a vertical position, not horizontal, as is classically described in out-of-body experiences. So it was quite intriguing again to me at that age. I didn't really know what context to put it into. So then I as you mentioned in the introduction, I went and I found a book on the subject, which was by a parapsychologist called Janet Lee Mitchell. And I read that, and that gave me some scientific context. I guess I always had a slight leaning towards science as well. I was very gifted with electronics. I was very good with computers. I had a home computer from when I was a very small child, and a PC by the time I was in my early teens. So I was quite literate on that level as well. So science still was quite key for me, even though a lot of people would, I guess, see these as contradictory areas.
So when you then started to develop, it was intriguing, because I know we've touched upon your artistic interests, but how did they develop, and how did they work with the experiences you were having? Do you believe that they are linked in some way? And can you tell us a little bit about your artistic projects as well?
I guess with the art, I wanted a way that I could really explore what was happening to me once I'd learned to induce the out-of-body experiences. And also there was a sense that more and more people were coming to me and saying, can you teach me these things? How can I do it for myself? How can I learn? And I was realizing that when I looked at other books by other authors, they were generally coming from a very esoteric angle, which I'd studied as well, just because I wanted to look at all of the different areas. But somehow it felt lacking to me, because I didn't get this sense that this was really based on research or really known to be effective in a scientific context. So I guess I was really interested if there was more to it than that, if there were ways that this could be approached in a more systematic way. And I guess that's when I came into contact with the Monroe Institute and read Robert Monroe's books and things like that, because they seem to have a slightly more scientific outlook on things. So that was interesting. But then again, it seemed to have reached a certain point, but it hadn't explored into other areas like virtual reality and like other forms of technology and things that could be used. So that was really where I came to the conclusion that contemporary art, especially installation art and art that can take place in an entire environment rather than just an image on the wall or something like that, that gave me the freedom, if you like, to work on developing processes to induce out-of-body experiences, and also to give people some kind of experience directly. So it was partly practical, I think, in a sense, and partly it allowed a freedom that maybe I couldn't have explored in other areas.
What did your tutors and associates at college make of this?
My associates were very interested. I guess with the tutors, I generally kept the more parapsychological aspects quiet. I didn't, at that time, I guess when I was studying, I was very much still self-conscious about the whole sort of parapsychological side of things. There's a huge stigma, as I'm sure you're aware, within the academic world towards these kinds of things, and most people are generally materialistic in their attitude. So I was quite reluctant to be too open about these things, because it would, in a way, undermine some of the more academic sides of what I was trying to do. So I focused on altered states, hypnosis, neurolinguistic programming, things that related to what I was doing, but weren't specifically about out-of-body experiences. Although that side was in there, I just didn't heavily emphasize that or talk about that too much at that point. But then at a certain point, I just came to the conclusion that for the integrity of what I was doing, I had to be open about the out-of-body experiences, and also to have the strength to say, well, these things do happen, they are objective and real, and there's good evidence for it. And that was when I started working on the books, basically, and started to put these ideas out there more into the public arena.
When you actually visited New York and the event you had there, the solo art exhibition you did there, was that an installation or was that sort of representational art?
That was an installation, yeah. That was, several pieces of work in that particular show. That was, had video work of hypnosis. So I explored things like going into trance, being hypnotized myself, hypnotizing others. So there was this sense of trying to explore psychology directly through using hypnosis and then recording what exactly the result was. So that was part of what the work was about. Then also these more sort of interactive elements as well, so that people coming to the show could experience something directly.
And what was the reaction from the audiences then in New York?
I think most of them got what I was trying to do, and most of them found it really fascinating, and I guess many of them could see different threads. I guess there were some people who, for example, it made them think of rituals and occultism, and others thought about shamanism and things like that, and others were just intrigued by the whole area of hypnosis and stage hypnotism and things like that. So there were many levels to how people reacted, but they were all very fascinated by the potential of the human mind, I guess. And I think that's what this all comes down to, this fascination with what's out there and how much we can actually experience if we engage with our own consciousness.
So in terms of the hypnotism side of things, were you trained in hypnotism or did you associate with hypnotists?
I associated with hypnotists, and I also did some training, sort of basic NLP, neuro-linguistic programming training. So it was kind of not to any deep level, but I've always studied a lot of different things and been very open to the different areas that I look into. So I guess if I get a thread of interest, I'll follow that and I'll see where it takes me. So that was kind of where I was coming from with that.
Because hypnotism always fascinates me. You know, it's one of these kind of areas that is extremely intriguing. In your opinion, do you believe that when somebody goes into a hypnotic state, are they actually in a trance state, or are they... Well, what is your opinions on it? From your experience, what do you think is taking place there?
I guess it depends how you define a trance, but I definitely think you can get into a trance and deep levels of trance. There are, I guess, in the more stage hypnotism type scenarios, there's a degree of play acting, there's a degree of performing for the audience and things like that. So I think maybe in those kinds of situations, it can't be taken as seriously, maybe. And there is a whole area that's things like false memories, etc., which I actually wrote my dissertation on at university. So I was quite intrigued by the idea that memories can be created that didn't actually happen and things like that, which I guess also led me to be quite precise in my diary entries and things like that, so that when I was recording my own experiences, my memory wouldn't come in and alter the details of what took place, etc., as much as is possible anyway.
Yeah, I was going to say, so in terms of the trance states, we have various trance states, but in terms of, say, because of your interest in spirituality, you're clearly a very, very spiritual person. Have you ever actually been in spontaneous altered states of consciousness that are hypnotic states that are actually brought about by spiritual experiences?
The whole thing was spiritual. I guess I have my own sort of definition of that. So I'm not sure I'm spiritual in the general sense of the word. Maybe, I don't know. But I have an interest in. I think all of this stuff can open you up and can maybe lead you to see not so much of a division between individuals and things like that. So as a result of direct experience, people can come to a more classically spiritual or compassionate or empathic state of being. And I think maybe that's how I would define the spiritual side of things with me. And in terms of what I have in experiences, I've done a lot of work with trance states of different forms, which I would self-induce. So some of my techniques for OBEs have actually developed out of doing techniques for going into trance and to try to get to deeper levels. Because I guess with my own work and my own out-body experiences and all of this, I've wanted to find ways to get more consistently to the deeper levels of trance, because that's when the more powerful out-of-body experiences also take place, I guess. So I've explored lots of different things.
Is this what we would recognise technically as the hypnagogic state? Are you talking about getting yourself into that kind of liminal, semi-asleep, semi-awake state, or is there something more than that? It's not hypnagogic, it's something more. I mean, because
I would say it's deeper. It's deeper than that. The hypnagogic state for me is very much in the early part of just as if I'm going to sleep or something. When I lay down, I'll start to get these images or impressions will arise, maybe quite quickly in the first 5-10 minutes, something like that. Whereas the kind of states I'm talking about, I guess it's when the analytical part of the mind is no longer active, and the sense of self or normal awareness of our body, etc., is shut down. That's maybe what I would define as a trance to some degree. Because as long as you're still able to look and analyse what's going on, you're still in a sort of semi-conscious state, I would say. But when that shuts down, that's really when there's a trance going on, if you like, because I think you're experiencing something beyond the normal consciousness, beyond the normal conscious awareness, maybe is a better way of putting it.
That's interesting, isn't it? Because effectively, whenever I'm in the hypnagogic state, the ego is still there. I still have the idea of selfhood.
Yeah, exactly.
In other words, I'm observing it, and I'm part of it, but I'm observing it. Whereas I think what we're saying here is that the next stage is moving into almost the oceanic feeling, the sensation of loss of ego, loss of personality, and just pure perception of what's happening without interpretation, I suppose.
Exactly.
Okay, so then one of the areas that I know that you and I have never really discussed, well, we touched upon in terms of my future trip to India, but you then took yourself off to India at a comparatively young age. What made you want to do that, and what did you experience over there? Did that journey, the inner and outer journey of going to India, how did that change you? For instance, we touched upon Jainism, for instance, as a concept and as a religious belief. And I totally agree with you in terms of that. I mean, I had a few Jain friends many, many years ago, and I was stunned by their amazing way of looking at the world. It's incredible. It's world-changing. But if you can tell us a little bit about the India experience and how that contributed to Graham Nicholls, the person.
Well, I think I was 19 when I went at that point. It wasn't wholly my own decision. Partly my closest friend, who I'm still very close to, is half Indian. And so half of his family is over in India. And on one day when we were talking about, life in general and things like that, he mentioned that he was going to visit his relatives and asked me if I'd be interested in coming with him to India. So there was that side of it. Then the other side of it was I'd had an out-of-body experience where I'd been drawn to the Indian side of the Himalayas. And so I had this interest in going to the Himalayas, which I didn't actually do on that trip, but I was very interested in visiting the mountains. And then I also, obviously being interested in these kinds of things, I was starting to look into yoga. I was looking into different aspects of yogic practice, sadhanas and different things like that to get a sense of whether they could be used and would make any sense to what I was doing. I was looking at things like yantras as well, geometric patterns that you can focus on and meditate on and things like that, because I'd already been using the tattva symbols, which are elemental symbols that originally came from Hinduism, but then were then used by organizations like the Golden Dawn. So I started to work with those kinds of things as well. These were all sort of symbolic ways to access different states and to work with my own consciousness in that way, because as you also mentioned in the introduction, I made a decision that I didn't really want to explore the psychedelic route. I wanted to explore doing these things with my own conscious control and with my own brain, I guess. So yeah, and then basically I went off to India, and the particular Jain aspect, we went to a temple, I think it was in Bhubaneswar. We went up into this particular temple, and I walked into the temple, and one of the Jain priests, there was lots of people there and Westerners as well, and we walked in, and this priest just came straight for me, said something to me and put a blessing on my forehead, and then disappeared again. And I was quite intrigued by the whole experience in this place, and so it led me to talk to people and to find out a bit more about the Jain concept. And I was already vegetarian by that point, so it led me to maybe understand a bit more the ideas behind vegetarianism. I'd done it kind of as a spiritual thing, in the sense of I think it can be beneficial to your actual practice, not consuming animal products or meat at that time. But then I actually started to realize more the compassionate, or the ideas of why kill something when you don't need to kill something, simple as that, really. And I think that's what the Jains really encapsulate in many ways.
So you then come back to the UK, and then you go off and you do your artwork. Where are you in terms of things now? What I would like to do, because I don't want to miss the opportunity to discuss this now, so to make sure that we don't run out of it. One of the most amazing experiences I have ever heard, and I cite it many times in my talks, and we've discussed it in great detail. But I'm sure to the individuals out there, or the people listening in now or watching, or who will be watching this in due course, will have never heard of your particular experience with or a particular event that took place in West London. Now, the reason I want to bring this up is because one of the major issues of all out-of-the-body experiences is veridical proof, the idea that you can in some way prove the fact that you've been outside of your body. But with your particular experience, not only does it prove veridical proof, it also proves precognition as well. And it's absolutely undeniable, that, in my opinion, as well. So can you tell us a little bit about that particular event, how it developed, what happened, and what followed through?
Okay, well, in the late 90s, I was involved with a small group in London who used to meet on a monthly basis, and each month there would be a different person leading the group usually, and giving a talk or an introduction to a different area of expertise or interest that person had. So it could be very, very varied, from more traditional esoteric ideas through to science, through to alternative energy. It could be on lots of different subjects. On this particular meeting, I was going to be talking about out-of-body experiences, and I just developed at the time a technique that I call the G technique, which is a combination of muscle tension and breathing patterns that, for me, helped very effectively to get me to the vibrational state. And I've since found other people as well find it an effective way to do that. So I was teaching the others in this group how to do this particular technique. So then we all spread out. There were 4 other people there with me at the time. We all spread out throughout the room. We were in a large sort of rehearsal space in North London. Spread out throughout the room. I started to do the technique. I was putting quite a lot of energy into it, focusing on this particular technique quite a lot. But initially nothing was really happening. I wasn't really feeling like I was changing state or really accessing anything. And I was kind of at the point that I was thinking, oh dear, maybe this technique isn't as good as I thought it was, or something like that. And almost as soon as I thought that, I felt this weight. It's very hard to describe. It was like something came down and sort of, I just felt naturally that I should go down to ground level. So I went down to ground level, and pretty much as soon as I hit the ground, I went into an out-of-body experience. I remember a sense of kind of moving maybe, or maybe initially leaving the body, something like that, but I couldn't see anything at that point. It was just like a shift away from the body, something like that. But then the next thing I was aware of was very, very vividly, I was moving through a natural environment, what looked like almost like a jungle or some kind of tropical environment. There was trees on both sides. There was maybe a stream running through. It could have been a path, I'm not certain, but there was this sense of moving through this jungle-like environment. And then I came to a kind of clearing in the experience. And as I came to that clearing, there was a kind of break in the experience, and I found myself standing on the corner of Moore Street and Old Compton Street, which make a kind of point in the road that faces directly down Old Compton Street. So I was standing there. Everything seemed greyish blue. My whole visual field was this greyish blue colour. And I was looking around. I recognised it clearly where I was, because I'd worked in that area, and I was very familiar with it. I also looked across to my right, and there was the Polo Bar Italian restaurant that was there at the time as well. So I knew exactly where I was. Then a few seconds into the experience, an explosion burst out from the right-hand side of the street, maybe 100, 125 metres away, something like that. There was this general chaos started to happen, and I remember a man running close by me, almost like he was going through me or something, but very, very close, and he ran towards the explosion. And as I was watching the general chaos and people running around and wondering what was happening, etc., I also felt this wave of, it just felt like emotion, anguish, and thoughts in a way of people coming from that event seemed to hit me as I stood there, and that just almost knocked me out, I guess. It kind of blacked me out of the visual component of the experience, and then I felt like I was in a kind of void, and I was not really aware of where I was or what was going on. But what I found out afterwards is the other people, the 4 people that were in the room with me while this was all happening, they had noticed that I was showing signs of distress. So one in particular, a guy called Chris, had come quite close by, and Lawrence as well, who speaks on the video that I've made about this experience. But Chris was trying to coax me out of this trance, I guess, this sort of void state. I slowly came out of the state and started to become aware again and return to normal consciousness. And then we moved into a circle in the middle of the room, and I described exactly what I just described to you, plus the fact that I really felt this was going to be a precognition, which I struggled with at the time. I didn't really know how something like that could be possible. But I had this strong feeling that it was a future event, and that it wasn't just a hallucination or anything like that. So I described this to everyone who was there, and then 5 days later, there was actually an explosion in the exact location that I described on Old Compton Street. So basically it was very close to the actual out-of-body experience, and it was a strong verification of what I'd seen. And I guess the unique thing about that out-of-body experience, as well as it being precognition, there were also witnesses to the event.
Powerful, powerful, powerful. And again, if you want to take the opportunity, check on Graham's on YouTube, where Graham describes that event in detail. Also, if anybody's interested, when Graham and I met up in London, I took the opportunity to film Graham describing that event in the location that he found himself in his out-of-the-body state, looking in the direction as well, which actually really brings it home in very, very powerful form, exactly just how strange and how potentially paradigm-changing this particular event was. Because here we have somebody that is out of their body in a future state. And of course, that is most peculiar, the idea that he was in the future. And I'm reminded in many ways, Graham, and I don't know if I mentioned this to you, that when I lived up in Liverpool, there was a guy who contacted me because he'd had a series of powerful precognitive images. And one of the precognitive images he had was he was in a hotel room looking out over a foreign airfield. And as he was looking out, he saw a Concorde aircraft go past with its tail on fire. And as it went past, and it's quite strange, as he explained to me, he was looking out of the hotel window and the plane went out of view. So in his dream or hypnagogic state, he moved forward to see the plane crashing in the ground. Now, what is intriguing about this is that a few weeks later, he sent a fax to British Airways warning them that somewhere foreign a Concorde was going to go down, and the back was going to be on fire and everything else. But what was particularly veridical about this case was that, rather like you described, feeling the emotion of the people involved, this gentleman explained to me that he felt people going through him. And he felt the confusion of the people. But what was intriguing was he speaks German. And he said that people were speaking to each other in German. So he knew not only that the plane was going to crash, that it was going to be foreign, it was going to be a Concorde, that the flames were going to be coming out the back, but the people on the plane were going to be German. Now, of course, we now know that the Concorde disaster in Paris, that most of the people on the plane were in fact Germans. And again, we have the issue here of not just the perception of a future event, but the idea that you can perceive the emotions of people as well around you. That there's almost like this kind of Reichian orgon energy that we can sense in certain ways as well. Now, I think this case will run and run just because it's so intriguing. But what's your opinion on? I know we've discussed this in private, but this tinge of blue or grey or whatever. You say that you've had this before, and you know from this particular imagery or sensation you have that you know it's precognitive OBE rather than a standard OBE.
Well, they've all been veridical. I don't know that they've all been precognitive. I've only had 3 of these blue tinge, I call them cerulean state experiences, and one of them could have been precognitive, but there was no particular sign within the experience to say that it was precognitive. It was actually the first verified veridical out-of-body experience I had, which goes back to the early 90s, and it was on Lancaster Road, where I was able to see the sign in the street with the W11, so I could see the postcode, the sort of district that it was in. I also knew the location of the street by the route that I'd taken, because I followed the whole route in the out-of-body experience. And then I went into the top floor of a 2-level kind of sort of like a terraced house, Victorian sort of style, I guess, maybe Edwardian. But I went into the top level, and there was a table laid out with
Can I just ask a quick question, Graham? Can I just ask a quick question on this, because it's quite intriguing? When you say that you decided, was it your decision to go in that direction and walk in that direction or move in that direction, or were you motivated to do so by something else? In other words, were you a witness to something that was moving in this environment, or did you choose to follow that route? If that makes sense.
The way I describe it was I felt like I was running on autopilot, but I could sort of pause and maybe steer in a particular direction or something like that. But I hadn't chosen to. The experience started on the corner of Edgware Road and Bayswater Road, so where Marble Arch is in London. So it started there, right on that corner at the height of the lampposts. So I was at that point, and then I drifted off to the right down Bayswater Road. Now, I had a certain amount of control, which is sort of how a lot of my experiences are. I could sort of look in a particular direction. I could sort of turn my perception in a particular way, but generally I was going with this feeling of sort of being on autopilot to some degree. Sometimes it's very hard to say 100% whether I chose to go in a particular direction or not, because sometimes it's almost like I look in a particular direction and then I end up going that way, but it's not that I really decided I was going to go that way, if you see what I'm saying. So it's hard to say sometimes, but I think in general the more powerful experiences are the ones that I go with, or I let the experience unfold.
Okay, I jumped in there as well. So you're going back, so you go into the room, and what did you see?
I was basically standing behind the desk. The window was sort of now on the left of me, and I was standing in front of a desk, and it had sheets of paper on it. And another effect that I've noticed commonly in very veridical out-of-body experiences is this kind of zoom effect. So as I looked down, I would have normally, in physical consciousness sense, when I looked at a table like that, I would have expected to see the whole table laid out. But what happened was when I looked down, my vision seemed to zoom right in. And so instead of seeing the whole table laid out, I saw the pigment of the paper, and I saw the name of the person who was living there. So I just got the name and the postcode. But again, with the same zoom effect happened when I was going past the street sign. I didn't see the whole name on the street. It zoomed in to the W11. So this is another factor that I've noticed in my experiences, and I think there's a similar effect that's sometimes described in remote viewing as well.
Because
of course we're not.
Go on, Graham. Yeah.
I was just going to say, because of course, we're not using our physical senses. There's this idea that an out-of-body experience is just going to be the same as seeing things with our normal eyes, but of course there aren't normal eyes receiving photons in the way that we do in the physical sense. So I think there's an interpretation of information going on in an out-of-body experience, and sometimes that's more translated than others, I guess, and I think there's particular elements like this zoom effect and things like that arise in the out-of-body experience, and I think they're clues to what might be going on.
Yeah, because I sometimes have debated in my own mind, when we talk about synesthesia and we talk about people being able to taste colours and the way certain people see particular numbers being particular shapes. In other words, we're using a different kind of form of sense. And I know when my first academic paper I wrote, I was very much intrigued with how can somebody see things when, as you rightly say, there's not photons actually stimulating the retinas or the rods and the cones, and it's not processing in the way we would normally understand it to be. However, there has been recent research which has shown that when people are in deep meditative states, and when they're actually perceiving things in deep meditative states, the same parts of the brain light up as if they're processing visual information in exactly the same way as if they were physically seeing things. So clearly there is a kind of an inner and an outer perception of these things. Now, I know one of the things that we touched upon when we met again was this ongoing issue of how we can ever really prove veridically, I mean, some of the work that's being done, that was done by Penny Sartori, and people like Peter Fenwick and various other individuals, and Bruce Grayson et al., in trying to prove when there's a near-death experience, when somebody's had a cardiac arrest, that they float outside of their body and they will then see a computer screen with random numbers generated or random images. But if it's the case that when you're in these out-of-the-body experiences, you can't really control to that extent your movement, but on top of that, you're having this micropsia kind of imagery of a kind of a tunnel vision that's focusing in on specific areas. It's very difficult to actually see what you're supposed to see, just because it's not possible. You don't have that degree of control. And I'm reminded then of your other case of the Nevsky Cathedral, which again was comparatively recent and was actually shown to be the case. Would you like to tell us about that particular incident as well?
Well, in that particular experience, I had quite a classic out-of-body experience at the beginning of it. In the apartment I live in now, the bedroom is in an attic, so there's a kind of, the walls are sloped like this. And in this particular experience, I felt the sensation of lifting out of the body, the whole classic out-of-body experience. And I went up through the roof of the building, and then I was aware of being in the middle of the street, over the street I live on, which is a sort of cobbled street in the old town of Tallinn. And I then drifted over the rooftops or across the corner of the rooftops from where I am out across the town, and went to the other side of Tallinn. And I came right up over the Alexander Nevsky Cathedral, which is divided into 5 domes. There's a big central dome, and then there's 4 smaller domes around the outside of it. Now, in front of it is I think it's the Estonian Parliament building, or some important building of that nature, right in front of the cathedral. And then on the other side there's buildings, and so essentially you can only see the front of the cathedral if you're standing right in front of it. So in this experience I came over from the far side, from the side you can see, and I came over to the side you can't see, and I was looking down from above, and I noticed that there was damage to the left-hand side, which would have been the right-hand side if you were standing in front of the cathedral. So to the left-hand side from where the door was. So again, my vision then zoomed right in on this detail, and I saw tarpaulin, the detail, the kind of grain of the tarpaulin, and then I saw yellow tape stretched across the window that was on the right-hand side if you were standing in front. So I thought to myself, this is something again that I could verify in a definite way. I'd never seen anything like that, any damage to that building before, etc. So it was something that would stand out and would be unusual. So after the experience, I reported this to my partner. We wrote all the details down, everything I said before we went there, and then I took a photograph when I actually went there of the actual damage to the building that was exactly where I'd said, and was had the yellow tape and the tarpaulin, the whole thing. So that was another sort of 100% accurate, veridical out-of-body experience that was also confirmed and witnessed by my partner.
Well, this is it, isn't it? One of the things that when we first got in touch, I mean, I think you're the person more than anybody that's convinced me, because I've always been of the opinion that whenever people travel in space when they're in the out-of-body experience. They're actually traveling in a kind of an alternate version of this reality. That it's not quite this reality. It's kind of an overlapping area, part of, I don't know, the 0-point field or whatever you like to call it. Whereas it is clear from your experiences that my position on this needs to be revised, because there is evidence that people will, within consensual three-dimensional space, get outside of their body and perceive reality externally. Now, of course, there could be an argument to say that what do we define by reality? What is reality out there? What is the phenomenal world? And all the time when you're describing these particular cases, I'm reminded of the George Ritchie case, the classic NDE from 1943 that stimulated Raymond Moody to write his first book on the out-of-body experience, Life After Life. Because in this, George Ritchie was a young guy who was dying of double pneumonia in a hospital ward in a military hospital. And he had this need he was due the next day to have some kind of induction course for medical training. He was a young soldier. And as he was in the dying state, he found himself walking outside of his body, walking into the corridor. Somebody walks straight through him, and then suddenly he floats, and he finds himself floating almost due eastwards, heading to Virginia from Abilene in Texas, en route to where his interview was going to be. And he floats, again, with your descriptions, he's floating around about 200 or 300 feet high. He comes down, he sees a bridge, he sees a river, and then he lands in a town. And he lands in this town at a junction of two roads, and he sees a diner. And the diner's got a blue flashing neon light outside advertising a particular form of beer. He recognised the name of it and everything else. And he then tries to lean on a lamppost. No, he leans on a guy rope towards a lamppost, and he falls through it, or his hand goes through it, which is rather similar to your description of somebody walking through you. He then panics and then goes back, and he gets back to his body, and the story is that he'd been out for about 8 or 9 minutes, and he technically died. He'd had sort of clinical death and everything else, and he'd come back. But the intriguing thing is, and I was unaware of this, was that he subsequently, with a group of friends, retraced his steps, and they actually found the town. I think it was Vicksburg. And again, there was a diner on the corner, and it did have a blue light. So again, you've got a veridical experience there that's undeniable. It is absolutely undeniable, really. Either with your case, either you're lying, your associates are lying, your girlfriend is lying, and everything else. To what gain? Yeah. So applying Occam's razor to this, surely you have to look at the motivations of the individuals involved. Now, in terms of your latest work and the things you're now doing, some of the work you're doing now, some of the mechanisms you're working with, the machinery you've worked with in the past, or the mechanisms, can you tell me a little bit about the work you're doing now and how you train people and what you can offer people in terms of your own online training courses and such like?
Well, I guess going back to the early installations and structures that I built, one of the original ones was I named Epicene because of this idea of being in a kind of liminal in-between state, neither one nor the other. So I called it that. And essentially it was a platform that lifted the participant off of the ground, and then they were taken through an audio experience while they were in this suspended state. And the idea was, if you're thinking about hypnosis and things like that, to try and suggest to the person's unconscious extra elements that would increase the likelihood of them having an out-of-body experience. So at that time I started working with sound technology to go inside these installations that I've made several of now, but that was the original one, which I later called Infra-liminal sound. And I started to observe my own brain state using neurofeedback technology, and started to look at what was happening and what frequencies and what different sounds would affect my own brain state. So then I came to the point where I developed some sound technology that essentially will induce the vibrational state in most people. It's something like 90 plus people. 90+% people will have a vibrational state from using the sound. So that's one of the things that came out of doing this kind of work and looking into these kinds of things. And now I'm sort of looking into related areas. I'm still interested in some virtual reality things. I'm working on a course at the moment that will be a pre-recorded audio-video course, but we'll also have some virtual reality files that if someone's got a 3D television or 3D goggles, they can do a virtual reality walkthrough. There will be a whole range of exercises and things like that. And I also teach in a one-on-one way through coaching over Skype, because I find the one-on-one methodology, I think, is the most effective way to teach. So it's my preferred way of working with people and really trying to help them have their own experiences and find out for themselves about these kinds of experiences, because I think that's really what it's all about. It's about spreading these ideas and helping people access different states of awareness.
And your experiences, you and I have both experienced the hypnagogic light experience, the Procol and Winkler machine. And I know that you had quite a curious experience with that comparatively recently. Would you like to tell us a little bit about that?
Oh yeah, well, Parsonage Side Retreat, which is an excellent centre not far from Glastonbury in England, they have 2 lucid light devices, and the owner there invited me to spend a couple of days doing some experimentation with the devices. So I went down there and I spent a couple of days trying out different frequencies and exploring whether the device could be used to help with out-of-body experiences and things like that. Because my initial experience on the device was maybe that it was too strong in terms of the kaleidoscopic type effect that it creates. It creates this sort of multicolored patterning in the mind's eye. At least that was my experience with it. So I wanted to see if that could be tuned down, and maybe it could be more subtle and therefore allow for your own conscious information to come into the experience as well. So I did this. I tuned it right down, and I had someone helping me. So literally, I would say, turn the strobe speed down, turn the brightness up or down, and I would give feedback as I was working on it. And on this particular day, I spent about 90 minutes under the lamp, which is quite a long session by standards with Delucia. And around 70 minutes in, I started to have what I would probably term as some kind of bilocation, not in a physical sense, of course, but I mean, I felt like I was in two places at once initially, and then there was this kind of like a semi-out-of-body experience, I guess you would say. It was like remote viewing, but more of a kinetic, physical sense to it than average remote viewing. And I started to see a huge vista-like landscape, huge awareness of being in what I interpreted to be the US. It looked very much like US type trees, and there were freight trains that looked sort of brownish or maybe rusty, and there was flooding, huge flooding throughout the whole area. Half the trees were submerged in water, and there were it just looked like the whole surface of the land was actually water. So this was quite intriguing, because again it had this crystalline sort of vividness that gave me the impression that it was something real or tangible. So it didn't seem like it was just, I don't know, just stuff coming out of my mind, etc. So I noted all of this down, and I also recorded myself talking about it, which I put a small video online now, which I recorded right after the session. And then I wrote to you and described what I'd actually seen in that. And then a few days later, there was the tornado hit America, and there was a whole load of flooding all across America as a result of that. So I don't see it as a completely solid experience like the other ones, because the detail is not as exact, but it was still, again, suggestion that there's something valid and veridical to these experiences.
Absolutely amazing, and thank you for contacting me on that as well, because this is the kind of information we need going forward. Because, as I said at the start of the program, you and I are both trying to come up with answers and solutions, if we can, within the present paradigm, if possible. And if it doesn't fit in with the present paradigm, we have the black swans or the white crows that William James termed, in terms of we need to look forward to see exactly what is happening here. Graham, thank you very much for a wonderful hour's discussion. If you'd like to now give some details of your website and the other locations you are on the web, so that people can contact you and pick up on your fascinating work and any of the books you've got or anything else. So here's let people know what you're about.
Okay, well, my website is www.grahamnicholls.com. That's Nicholls with 2 L's. My books are called Navigating the Out-of-Body Experience is the second one. That is the practical guide on how to have out-of-body experiences, and it also goes into a lot of the science. And my first book, Avenues of the Human Spirit, is much more about all of my experiences up until that point, and the kind of insights, I guess, the spiritual insights that these kinds of experiences have given me, and trying to look at all this from a sort of rational perspective of exploring what's happening to me and understanding where it relates to other areas like spiritual or yogic practices and things like that, but trying to do it without pre-assumptions and with holding an open mind. And also on my website there's information about my coaching, and shortly there'll be more information about my recorded course.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And thank you, everybody, for watching this latest edition of the Anthony Peake Consciousness Hour. Just to let you know that our next guest will be Dr. Serena Roney-Dougal, who is an expert on various areas of human psychology and the overlap between the mystic and the real. This will be we'll be recording it in a month's time, and it will be broadcast subsequently. We also have some very, very interesting guests coming up as well, including Dr. Penny Satori, who's one of the world's leading researchers in, again, veridical near-death experiences. So please stay touched on this program, and I'd like to again give my thanks to Dia Nunez for hosting the show as usual on the H2O network, and being quiet in the background and sorting everything out when things go wrong over there in Denver. So my thanks again, and thanks for listening in. And Graham, we will have you back as a future guest. I know that we've just scratched the surface of the things we've discussed in the past. Thank you very much.
Sure. Thanks.